Welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 409th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a different speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. It's not working?
It is, but not enough.
Not enough. Well, is that better?
Film they'll put it up on the internet.
Can you hear it now?
You get closer to the mic, it'll be better.
All right.
It rules.
Yeah. I got both these things down. Well, welcome to the College of Complexes. This is our 409th meeting since we started in February 2009. We put a different speaker on every week, a different subject. We require a speaker to take a position on an issue or express a point of view. They have to be for or against something. We don't care what it is. We have an hour to make a presentation. If they go over an hour, we cut them off. If anybody interrupts the speaker, we might interrupt her. We'll listen to only one fool at a time. That's one of our rules. And we have questions and answers of the speaker, not speeches. Then we have remarks, rebuttals. The speaker, everybody in this audience that wants to gets 5 minutes at the podium here to respond to the speaker said. The speaker gets the last word, gets a comment, and close the meeting. That's how it works. But before we introduce our speaker, we have time for announcements. Anybody have any announcements they want to make? Now's the time to do it. And come on up here. Make your announcement.
Oh, I just want to wish Albert happy birthday.
You want to wish Albert a happy birthday? All right, happy birthday. Many more of them.
I have an announcement.
Oh, you have to come up here. Make it.
I have announcements for Plano Asia Fest. I'm on the board of Plano Asia Fest, and this year is the 15th anniversary, and it will be held in Hager Park, Plano, and it's free. I have the poster. If you have places to place the poster, please take one. I have some bookmarks to give away, and the bookmarks list the location, time, and place. In Plano Asia Fest, you will hear beautiful music, Asian music, dance, and we have a children area where there will be volunteers to teach kids how to make kites, how to do calligraphy, and everything is free. So hope you can be there and tell your friends and bring your kids and grandkids to come and join us. So these are free to give away.
Just now. Thank you. I think you taught me last Saturday night. I was in that meeting, but anyway.
Go outside.
I'm here. I'd like to talk to you. Maybe give me a buzz during the day tomorrow.
Thank you.
You think about it? That'd be great. Enjoy. Get out of it and enjoy seeing you again.
No.
I'll see you now. Bye. Is that tea or is that just water?
You got an announcement you want to make?
Yes.
Come on up here.
I wanted to know why.
Well, I can,
Do it
Oh,
from
that's
here.
right.
Go ahead. Get her up here.
Okay, well, you wanted the iced tea anyway, so, okay, just give them,
More attention.
you want this too?
No, just iced tea. Okay, no ice.
I think we should wish John Gentry happy birthday tomorrow.
Happy birthday, John.
Happy birthday, John.
Happy birthday.
Many more of them.
Oh, this gentleman has his in 3 weeks. What is your name?
Jerry?
Jerry.
Yeah, we're going to wish Jerry a happy birthday in 3 weeks.
Well, we may as well wish Hank a happy birthday.
It's today.
Hank is, the 20th?
His was the 20th, yes.
Hank's partying tonight, birthday.
Yeah, Hank is partying. Yes.
Oh, yes. All right.
John, when is your birthday?
It's 22nd of March.
It's gonna happen again.
They do that.
Any more announcements?
Today is mine.
I guess that's it for
Everybody
announcements.
needs to quiet their cell phone.
Next week, we have Rick Halpern will be talking about on the global status of human rights. I'm not going to read all this, but it's on your itinerary there. And on May 5th, we have May Day 1886 and 2018, how are we doing? Gene Lance will be talking about that, it's on your itinerary. And on May 12th, political correctness, multiculturalism, and diversity of age of Trump. Lloyd Chappelle will be talking about that, that's on your itinerary also. Again, I'm not going to read all this, put you to sleep. Our speaker tonight is Jen Lee. She's a PhD in anthropology and a Mandarin teacher. She's going to talk about from blind spot to personal growth. She'll discuss how personal growth can be achieved by examining one's own biases and prejudices, drawing from her own personal experience and observations of politics and culture. She argues that what is considered as real, for example, as in happiness, often depends on one's perspective. She also argues that sometimes compassion is more important than truth when discussing controversial subjects such as God, guns, and gays. Without further ado, please give a very, very warm welcome to Jen Lee.
Good evening. I'll start with telling you a story, a little anecdote. One day I invited a friend, a traditional Chinese doctor, to come to my home for lunch and for conversation. And seeing this, and she said, you have a Chinese herbal medicine grinder. And I said, this is not a grinder. You know what this is?
Tibetan,
It's a prayer bowl, a singing bowl for meditation, and some Sunday services will start with this. But to my friend who is a Chinese doctor, traditional doctor, and she saw this as a grinding bowl for herbal medicine. And my topic actually started from thinking, why would she think this is a grinding bowl? There is a saying, if the only tool we have is a hammer, we see everything as a nail. If we have a nail, we always want to have a hammer. So for the Chinese doctor, her tools are acupuncture or herbal medicine. So when she sees this, and she thought it's perfect for grinding herbal medicine. And how many times that we have in our lives that we try to solve a problem by using the only tool that we have, and instead of seeing beyond that, what we could have multiple tools for different problems. And that's how I came up with this topic, from blind spot to personal growth. So I'll start from another personal story from before moving into these 3 Gs. How I remember my first significant changes of perspectives. The first breakthrough for me in overcoming my blind spot was when I was in college in Shanghai in the early 1980s. In a social studies class, we were taught there was a right way and a wrong way of understanding the world. The right way of seeing the world is called a materialistic way of seeing the world, instead of the idealistic way of seeing the world. Of course, the so-called materialistic way of seeing the world was supposed to be Marxist ideology, Marxist theory, but we didn't really know what Marxist theory was. So it was, I would say, it's an ideology than a real theory because the theory was more complex. Give you an example of the materialistic way of seeing the world is the way that we talk about religion. So religion was considered as the opium of the people. And I thought it made perfect sense. Until I came to the readings of Plato later I read a book called The Tao of Physics, an exploration of the parallels between modern physics and Eastern mysticism. From Plato, I learned that the idea and the form can be more important or meaningful than the materialistic world. For example, what is more real? A table in front of you, the table that you are using, or the idea of the table. So the materialistic way of thinking, and most people will think that way, is this table, the physical table, is more real because you can touch it, you can see it, you can use it, and has 4 legs. But the idealistic view of the table, in some ways, is more real because it is the idea of the table that produces a real table. A table can be 4-legged, can be 3-legged, or can be 2-legged, or even without legs. For example, I'll show you this a tray. Can this tray be used as a table? Yes? So if you want to eat from your bed, you might use a tray and use it as a table. So that's the idea. So from Plato I learned sometimes actually the idea is more powerful than the material. So it could be the idealistic view of the world has its own merit. And also from the book, The Tao of Physics, an exploration of the parallels between modern physics and Eastern mysticism, I learned religion can be more than the opium of people. I used to think that all religions and God were created by the people, and these were either people ignorant of science or lack confidence in themselves. They have to search for external God for comfort. But seeing a physicist who wrote this book, I realized that as a physicist who wrote this book, he is not ignorant of science, and he is very confident in his field and a way of seeing the world. So that it can be a religion for a curious mind can be used to see the world beyond the limit of the physical boundaries. That's when I started to shift from being an atheist to an agnostic, to a reverent agnostic, and now kind of moving to a mystic. But that will be another day, another topic. And a reverent agnostic mean and a mystic mean. So I'm still evolving. This discovery that one can see the world in different perspectives sparked my lifelong interest in learning about philosophy, religion, anthropology, and psychology. Eventually, it helped me to live a healthier and a happier life. Now, happiness. Happiness is like the Holy Grail. a wondrous thing to pursue, but almost impossible to attain. A common definition of happiness in psychology is a mental and emotional state of well-being, which can be defined by, among others, positive or pleasant emotions, ranging from contentment to intense joy. Happy mental states may reflect judgments by a person about their overall well-being. We can learn three things from this definition. 1, happiness is a mental or emotional state of well-being. 2, the emotions of happiness can range from contentment to intense joy. 3, happiness is a personal judgment. Sometimes people fall into the false belief that I will be happy if I had a lot of money. I will be happy if I had good health. Or I will be happy if I had a perfect relationship. Or some people might say I'll be happy if our president was other than Trump. And over here.
How about Hillary?
So this is why this false belief? Because we treat happiness as if it were a nail, and all you need was a hammer to hammer the nail. Professor Tal Ben-Shahar, a professor of psychology at Harvard University, taught a class about what he meant to be. Taught a class about what it means to be happy and how to achieve it. He said, attaining lasting happiness requires that we enjoy the journey on our way towards a destination we deem valuable. Happiness, therefore, is not making it to the peak of the mountain, nor is it about climbing aimlessly around the mountain. Happiness is the experience of climbing towards the peak. So the key to happiness is not to find the Holy Grail, but to find what is meaningful and valuable to you personally, and then develop tools to do well the things that are meaningful and valuable to you. It can be nurturing close relationships with family and friends, or developing personal hobbies and interests, or devoting one's passion for community service. This realization that happiness is not a destination, but a process of becoming more wholesome, helped me to go beyond my blind spot. Instead of focusing on what I lack, now I would rather focus on what is meaningful and what is valuable to me, and develop skills to do it well, such as sharing my thoughts on this topic with you today. Now, I'll move to more challenging topics of 3 Gs, God, guns, and gays. You'll be the judge if I have the skill and insight to take up these important, yet potentially controversial topics. Religion, politics, and sex. We don't talk about this openly most of the time, right? So, these are important topics, and for college complexes, the playground for people who think, I think it's appropriate to talk. Now, the first topic is God. As I mentioned, I thought atheists believing in no God made perfect sense when I was brought up in Shanghai, in China, where religion was, and it is still to a large degree, considered as the opium of the people. For a long time, I was blinded by the assumption that people who believe in God were either ignorant of science or lack of self-confidence, that they have to turn to external God for comfort instead of believing science and themselves. As I mentioned, my assumption was first challenged by that book by the physicist Fujita Capra, The Tao of Physics, Exploration of Parallels Between Modern Physics and Eastern Mysticism. a Canadian professor introduced this book to me when I was undergraduate in my early 20s in Shanghai. The author, Fritjof Capra, is an Austrian-born American physicist, systems theorist. With such credentials, he is certainly neither ignorant of science nor lack of self-confidence. I read the book with fascination, although I didn't understand everything in the book, but it did it sparked my interest in learning more about different religions and philosophy, mysticism, and science. The idea of God is usually associated with religion. It stirs deep emotional feelings for both believers and non-believers. At the two extreme sides, we see fundamentalists who believe that my God is the only true God. It is unchanging, and it is the only truth revealed to the humankind. On the other extreme is the atheist, and sometimes militant atheists, who believe there's no God and religion is not only the opium of the people, but the sources of all conflicts and wars. And has been used to exploit and oppress the people. Each side can find plenty of examples to support their arguments. And you probably have heard arguments from both sides, and I'm not going to detail these arguments. The fundamentalists on either camp, religious or atheists, can hardly communicate with one another because they're blinded by the assumptions that there is a black and a white answer. Either there is God or there is no God. Is it possible that the very different definition of God can vary from person to person? Can we imagine there is a power that is mightier than individual beings? Can we imagine that we could harness the mightier power for the good? Does it matter if this power is called Jesus, Allah, Buddha, Tao, or Hope? Is it possible to be neither a believer nor a non-believer? I think there is a third way, a spiritual seeker. Being a spiritual seeker can be challenging, but it can also be an exciting journey, where you learn, grow, and experience the wonder of different religions, gods, and the whole universe. My readings, reflections, and observations about God and religions have convinced me that it is not the physical truth that matters. Rather, it is the psychological truth that matters. If believing in a God or religion helps you to be a more compassionate, more loving, more transcendent, and more hopeful person, then this God or religion works for you. If believing in a God or religion makes you feel more righteous, more indignant, more arrogant, and more fearful, then you have to question the assumptions underlying this belief system. I'll end this session with a quotation from Dr. Wayne Dyer. Probably most of you have heard Wayne Dyer. He is an inspirational speaker. He said, "Don't be Christians, be Christ-like. Don't be Buddhist, be Buddha-like." So, if we can model ourselves like Christ-like or Buddha-like, our world will be a much brighter world. My second topic is guns. Talking about guns, I didn't realize why it was such an emotional issue for so many people until I started to dig deeper. Gun ownership. Now for this, I need statistics to back up. So I did research and I have statistics to back up. For gun ownership, the number of firearms available to American civilians is estimated at around 310 million. Americans own most guns per person in the world, about 4 in 10. saying that they either own a gun or live in a home with guns, according to a 2017 Pew Center study. A majority, 66% of US gun owners own multiple firearms, with nearly 3/4 of both gun owners saying they couldn't imagine not owning one. The second set of statistics was from gun-related deaths. On average, 90 Americans are killed every day as a result of gun violence. The US makes up less than 5% of world population, but holds 31% of global mass shooters. Every day in the US, 9 kids are just shot unintentionally. 900 children and teens take their own lives every year, almost all with a parent's gun. Gun-related suicides are 8 times higher in the US than in other high-income nations. US has one of the highest rates of deaths by firearm in the developed world, according to the World Health Organization data. Gun homicide rates are 25 times higher in the US than in other high-income countries, from American Journal of Medicine. Despite an overwhelming agreement among the American public, 90% of Americans support expanding Brady background checks to all gun sales, including 90% Republicans, more than 80% of gun owners, more than 70% of NIA members. Despite the increasing protest against gun violence, after a series of mass shootings in the last few years, most notably this February 14th Stoneman Douglas High School shooting, our young people are also calling for closing loopholes in gun sales. However, expanding Brady background checks to all gun sales is still not implemented. Why? Dan Gross, past president of Brady Campaign to Prevent Gun Violence, used to work as a partner in a big advertising agency in New York, knows well the dark underbelly. Now, this is his quotation, the dark underbelly of advertising, which is if you tell a big enough lie enough times, eventually that lie becomes the truth. And that's exactly what's happening here. The corporate gun lobby has spent billions of dollars blocking the CDC from doing research into public health epidemic of gun violence, blocking pediatricians from talking to parents about dangers of guns in the home, blocking smart gun technology and other technology that will prevent kids from firing parents' guns and will save lives. He said, they are desperate to hide the truth because they view the truth as a threat to their bottom line. It is time to go beyond the gun rights or gun control debate, instead focusing on gun safety issue. And I think very few people would disagree with the plea from Dan Gross in his TED Talk, why gun violence can't be our new normal. He said, it doesn't matter whether you love or hate guns. It's obvious that U.S. would be a safer place if there were not thousands of guns sold every day without background checks. Now I move to the last topic, gay. I remember a conversation I had with my daughter about gay issue when she was in high school. I said something like, I don't hold any prejudice against gay, but I sure wouldn't want you to be one of them. And she responded, why not, teenager? And I said, life is tough. Life for gay is tougher. Why would you make your life tougher than it is already? Of course, this is an overly simplistic way of looking at the issue of homosexuality. Being an anthropologist, I know there has been long debates over the biological versus environmental determinants of the causes of homosexuality. Although scientists favor biological models for the cause of sexual orientation, they do not believe that it is the result of any one factor. They generally believe that it is determined by biological and environmental factors. They state that most people's sexual orientation is determined at an early age, and a sexual orientation development involves a complex interplay between nature and a culture, between nature and a nurture. The biological factors are genetic and hormonal, both of which affect the fetal development of the brain, while environmental factors may be sociological, psychological, or involved in the early uterine environment. Scientists generally do not believe that sexual orientation is a matter of choice. The American Academy of Pediatrics stated, "There is no scientific evidence that abnormal parenting, sexual abuse, or other adverse life events influence sexual orientation. Current knowledge suggests that sexual orientation is usually established during early childhood." The American Psychological Association, American Psychiatric Association, and National Association of Social Workers stated, currently there is no scientific consensus about the specific factors that cause an individual to become heterosexual, homosexual, or bisexual, including possible biological, psychological, or social effects of a parent's sexual orientation. However, the available evidence indicates that the vast majority of lesbian gay adults were raised by heterosexual parents, and a vast majority of children raised by lesbian gay parents eventually grow up to be heterosexual. More and more scientific researchers show sexual orientation for overwhelming majority is not a choice, but a genetic predisposition. Life is tough. Why should we make life tougher for people with different sexual orientations? I find it especially disturbing that some harshest critics of LGBT community come from religious communities. Religion at its core should be the embodiment of love and compassion for all, not just to the believers or people who look, think, and act like us. My concluding remarks: from truth to compassion. Is there such thing as a truth, the capital T, that is universal and unchanging? When I was younger, I thought there was such a thing as the truth. The older I get, the less sure I am about the truth. A couple of years ago, I thought it was reasonable to believe two truths, two universal truths. One, everyone will die eventually. Two, things always change. Until someone challenged me, are you sure everyone will die? Really, really die? He said this with such a questioning look that made me wonder and retreat. Oh, it depends on how you define death. If you believe, some people believe heaven and hell, some people believe rebirth, karma. So now I don't even say everyone will die because people might have different definitions of death. So now I'm only left with one belief, universal truth. That is, things change. Things change. One cannot step into the same river twice. We all have blind spots, but we also have the capacity to expand our horizon and to grow as a person by learning different perspectives and suspending our judgments on complex issues. As I grow older, I start to appreciate beauty and compassion over truth statements. I believe many personal and social conflicts can be averted if we seek compassion over truth. Thank you. Now I take questions.
I'm afraid.
I'm free. Much better.
Perhaps you can comment on, in China, how does is there a conflict between Confucianism and communism, and how does that relate to people's attitude to the government and to each other?
That's a big question. It's not quite related to this topic. I'll try to answer briefly. Confucianism is, in the West, usually regarded as one of the three religions in China: Confucianism, Buddhism, and Taoism. But in China, Confucianism is not a religion, it's more a philosophy. And there are different interpretations of Confucianism. Nowadays in China, the government tries to use Confucianism to maintain social order. So one aspect of Confucianism is the emphasis on hierarchy, social order, which is beneficial for maintaining social order and harmony. So the government is supportive of Confucianism.
And communism?
Communism. What is communism? China never really claimed to be a communist country. China always says it's a socialist country. Okay, so according to a very simplistic model of Marxist theory, the history goes from slavery to feudalism, to capitalism, to socialism, and eventually to communism. So according to this model, China, for ideology, a simplistic way of saying is that claim to be a socialism. Communism will not be achieved until the whole globe becomes a whole unified a system where people work according to their ability and be given the resources according to their need. So it's a good utopia idea, but it's not there yet. And China didn't claim itself as a communist country. It claims to be a socialist country. And according to the simplistic model of this Marxist scheme, is that socialism is one step ahead of capitalism. And but people in the West usually thought of China as a communist country, and I think the reason is because the ruling party is Communist Party, but China never claimed itself to be a communist country. It's a socialist country.
So how can the ruling party claim to be communist, and yet the ruling ideology is socialist? What's the difference? Why? Is it just a matter of degree?
It's not a matter of degree. It's a matter of confused definition. The labels never tell the true story. So what do you think American economy is? What's the label you would give this economy?
Socialistic.
Capitalist socialism. So the label doesn't tell the whole story. And sometimes some Americans or some Chinese will say American system is more, in some degree, is more socialistic than in China. China now is very capitalistic in economy. So the labels don't tell the story, just kind of simplistic way of propaganda.
Thank you for your remarks. I'd like to address your second subject regarding guns. What would your thought be about that when someone wants to buy a gun, that they have to submit themselves to a training class with the use of the guns, of safety with guns, and how to protect themselves in the correct way? Because like an automobile, it's a tool to be used in a certain fashion. And it's the reverse fashion that it's used negatively that's causing so much controversy. How would you address that?
Thank you. I think the gun safety issue is the most important issue that we should focus on instead of debate on gun rights or gun control, because having gun is really a big thing for a lot of people. So what are steps that we can take to make sure that it will be used safely and it will not be available to those who have criminal background, to those who have mental problems, because a lot of mass shootings happened because those people with mental problems and have criminal backgrounds, they got hold of the guns. So the universal background check should be the first step. And also gun education, like gun training is very important. Parents should be responsible for their kids to know the safety, to lock the guns away when the kids are underage so they don't play with guns and accidentally shoot themselves or shoot their peers. So education, training, and background checks for all gun sales. If we can do these, that probably will cut the shootings in half. And most people, whether Republicans or Democrats, and even members of NRA, all are in favor of enforcing safety rules. And think that's where we should go.
I'm a veteran. I spent 8 weeks in basic training. 3 of those weeks was gun safety. Does everybody hear me okay? Okay. So again, going back to my original comment, I'm of the opinion that when someone buys a gun for the first time or the second or third, if they cannot prove some type of certificate of having gun safety classes or lessons, they should be denied.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
Well, you were correct in what you were saying about socialism and communism. According to Trotsky laid it out pretty emphatically that communism could not come until you had gone through a phase of a highly technological capitalist society that then had transformed to socialism, and then he felt that communism then could come. But what is your opinion? I mean, from my experience, Americans are very uneducated about what communism is. Even though many of them are against it, they really don't know much about it. What has been your experience?
I think communism is a utopia. As such, as a utopia, so far, nowhere in any corner of the world have really had communism. So people have negative view about it. It's not there. It's imagination. North Korea, China, they're not communist countries. They are not. They are authoritarian, you can say. One-party rule, but not communism. The real communism in Marxist theory is a utopia where everyone will have access to the resources according to your needs. You have resources according to your needs, and you work to your ability. So what's wrong with that? It's just that it's a utopia, it's an ideal, but it's not a reality. Whether that will be a reality or not, we don't know. But to me, it's just a utopia.
Would you, can I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Would you rather live in the United States or China? And I have a follow-up to that.
Well, I chose to live in the States. I'm an American citizen, so that's tell you the answer.
And what do you think makes this country truly free? It is our ability as the fourth branch of the government to repel them when they become so out of control and so overbearing. Our founders in the Constitution left us that remedy with the Second Amendment. That is why it is sacred that we not tamper with it. And in spite of all these mass shootings, and I hate it too, how many people were killed last year by the police, shot in the back, unarmed? Do you have any figures on that?
No, I don't have any figures on that. I think it's a balance. It's a balance of individual rights and also the social responsibility for as much the majority as possible. And we are always in a struggle of reaching that balance. There's no single answer to a complex issue. So I'm not here to say we should have gun control or gun rights. I'm saying that we should find ways to enforce this gun safety. And that's a dialogue that most Americans will agree. And we'll try to find ways of ensure that education, background checks to be in place so that decent people can have guns to defend themselves or to use as a sports. But we don't want to hurt innocent people and the children. So that's a balance that we all need to find.
Well, that's a noble idea, but in terms of a detente situation, the fact that we are not under tyrannical rule right now is because they know that we, the citizens, are armed. Gun safety begins at home with parents, and the way I raised my children was to teach them very early on what a firearm can do, the damage, and the rules at home. Out of all four of my boys, not a single one of them owns a gun, but they were introduced to them and they saw the dangers and they know what they can do. So that begins at home, and I just think that when we give up our ability to overthrow the government, and I know that's a very controversial thing to say, because I hope we never have to, but when we give up that ability to do it, then we're no longer free by default. And that's the difference between the United States and countries like China, Great Britain, Australia, Japan, Korea, all of these countries where the government does not fear the people. You can say you'd rather not live there.
Well, so my overarching argument is there are complex issues that we should not try to think in black and white terms. There are a lot of complex issues at gray area. And we need to, in order to be able to have a dialogue, is to go beyond our blind spot and to see the other sides of valid points. And so with gun issue, I purposefully not going to the theory or debate about control or rights, but rather safety, that all of us can agree. And I'm not expert on it, so I'm not going to say how, but I think that's the focus of people on different sides can think about how we can make it safe for as many people as possible.
Recently, I read that Harvard, in one of their recent journals, has said that where there are more guns, there's less crime. I don't know if other people have read that lately, but it's recently come out.
There are conflicting reports. There are also reports there are more guns and there are more violence. So it depends on what kind of sources you get. I know you can get one number from one source, another number from another source. But from my research, it showed usually the more firearms, the more accidents, and the more shootings. And that's the main, the researches that I found.
Would you say that Stalin and Mao Zedong were socialists then rather than communists?
These are false labels. They're neither socialists nor communists. They are not.
Because both of them and Pol Pot in Cambodia confiscated all the guns, and let me see now, I think 48 million Russians were murdered and 100 million Chinese, and who knows how many million in Cambodia. I think confiscation of guns is insanity. It's insanity.
No one said confiscation of guns.
I know.
I didn't say
No,
it.
I know you didn't.
haven't read anyone who said that, so that's an overly extreme view.
Well, I mean,
Who said that?
history has shown what those
But
guys did.
no one would say we'll confiscate guns. Who said that?
Well, I mean, they did it in Australia.
Oh, well.
It leads to it.
I mean, some people do that. Some people are for that. I think other statistics, you might look at Norway that has, in Western Europe, the highest possession of guns per person and the lowest crime rate. Belgium, the lowest and the highest crime rate, or murder rate, let's put it that way. I think that was the stats on it. And Kennesaw, Georgia passed an ordinance requiring every home to have a firearm and ammunition unless they had a felon or religious scruples. Crime went down 89% in Kennesaw, Georgia, and it went down only 10% in the rest of Georgia. It has remained there. So,
Well, that all depends on the statistics pick and choose. I'm not going to say it's right or it's wrong, but I'm sure it's one side of the story, and you probably read it right, but someone else could find some other statistics. But personally, I don't want to be working in a school knowing every teacher and every student carries a gun with them. I will not work in that environment. I know in the universities, some universities now allow teachers openly to carry gun, and some teachers, they wouldn't want to work in a school where you know your colleagues carry a gun and ready to defend and fight themselves. So that's my personal bias. I don't know about you. I don't want to work and live in a place where everyone carries a gun around me. And I don't know if I have to arm myself too, but that's not an environment I want to work.
I agree with you on schools and environments like that, but I think schools in the world in which we live need to have armed guards around the schools. Look at the history of it. Now, when I was a kid, my dad loved bird hunting. So my older brother and I, we had our shotguns and so forth. But the very first absolute rule was that every gun is always loaded. If you think you've taken the shells out of the gun, it's loaded. And you have to consider it that way. I think training is essential. I think if people can't afford it, the government should pay for it.
They can't afford guns, they can't afford guns.
That's pretty good.
You know,
Got three people back here.
Okay. Yeah, why don't you go first?
I just have a question, and you know, your comments regarding Marxism I always found very interesting. Are you aware that that really wasn't a completely new ideology? The early Christian church attempted that same kind of redistribution of wealth. Those who had money were expected to bring in property and sell it and distribute it to those who were in need. And of course, there was a French colony here that tried that. Like you say, it's a utopian idea. I heard that scripture read recently at Mass, and I thought, oh, I bet there are a lot of uncomfortable people here. Don't want to give up their wealth, even a small bit, to help somebody else.
I'll go back to God and suggest this for your reading. It's by biologist, Biology of a Cell by Bruce Lipton, because he did not believe in God after he studied the cell. He believes in life, as in you're saying, no death, eternal life, and he goes into that in his book. So it's interesting. I was a victim. My nephew was killed at age 7 by a gun. So I think the big problem is not, to me, the problem is automatic guns, or automatic weapons are just, there is no place for them. They kill people, they're not for hunting. We should not, the citizens should not be allowed to even have them. That's just my opinion.
To ask again, what is the attitude of Chinese to each other, informed by Confucianism on the one hand and socialism on the other hand? How do they feel about each other? Do they regard them as people to be preyed upon and used as pawns in some kind of economic venture, or do they really feel that in the Christian sense they should be helped and so on, people in need and so on and so forth? Well, how does that work?
That's an academic question. Most people don't really care. Most people don't think in those theoretical terms. Most people are very practical. Nowadays, I think in China, actually, the ideology is more utilitarian. Utilitarian in the sense that everyone wants to make money. But the traditional rule of social order, hierarchy, respect parents, and parents expect their kids to study and go to a good university and to go to a good job. These are just like day-to-day struggle of life. Most people don't think in a very theoretical level, Confucianism or communism, people don't really care. Even Deng Xiaoping said, it doesn't matter if it's a white cat or black cat, as long as it catches mouse, it's a good cat. So that's a very utilitarian mentality. I think only few people who are kind of at the level of thinking for more higher for social good or for social ideal. Most people really don't really care about these theoretical questions. They care about education, jobs, retirement, medical care, just like people here, like day-to-day issues.
John, I was wondering if you had looked into the question of how closely these mass shootings track with gun-free zones. I remember back decades ago, we started having people going postal. And then you find out, well, the postal offices, the government offices are a disarmament zone, victim disarmament zone, if you will. And wherever we've had these disarmed zones is where we have these mass shootings. Did you look into that at all?
No, actually, of these three topics, gun issue is I'm most unfamiliar with. I just thought it's interesting to talk about 3Gs, but I'm not expert. But after I did research, the only thing that I thought that we could come together is to discuss how we implement safety measures so people can have guns and can protect other innocent people. But all the details around the issue, I really don't know too much about it.
I guess that's the last question.
Time of rebuttal?
Tom, we're out of questions.
Okay.
You need to sit down.
Okay, thank you.
I'd like to say a few words about socialism and about guns as well. After the war in Second World War, in fact, just before it ended, the Socialist Party, the Labour Party, came into power. Now, it was a true socialist party. The big achievement was to introduce the welfare state. Now, the idea was there should be a safety net to actually make sure that the poorest and the weakest were protected in health, housing, and education. And certainly, I benefited from that, all three things. And and what happened was that even the right-wing Tory party, rabid right-wing people, went along with that. There was general consensus that there should be a social safety net, okay? And so the general feeling was, we went through the war, because I remember back to the First World War, where the same thing happened. And there was a notion of homes for heroes. Well, it never happened. Never happened. But after the Second World War, the general feeling was, never again. We're not going back to the 30s. Whereas my mother used to say, there were 10 men for every job. And people were treated like dirt. And believe me, with the class structure as it was, people were treated like dirt. And that's the way it was. And after the war, because of going through the bombing and so on, which I witnessed and went through, the attitude was, we're not going to that again. And so what happened was, we had free education right through high school and university for those that had the brains enough to pass the exams. If you couldn't get into college, like Imperial I went to, you would get in. You couldn't buy your way in. Healthcare was universal. We all paid in, and so on. And housing, there was a lot of social housing built, because there were, I mean, one in three houses was either destroyed or needed repair in England. And there was a massive campaign of rebuilding. It was amazing what they did, the Labour Party. Well, what happened was, over the years, there was pushback from the right wing, just as in this country. Any welfare at all, any social program is going to help the poorest, there's always pushback against. And so the right wing had a campaign that these people who were on benefits were scroungers and so on and so forth, even though certainly there's about 5% always there were 5% of people always unemployed, always. And so in this country, the 5% is a fiction, it's more like 7 or 8%. So in numbers, that means there's always 8 to 10 million always unemployed or underemployed. So what do? You let them starve in the street? Okay? So there has to be some form of social safety net. Now, the big thing is, Christian people would do that. And so I always make this distinction between religious people and Christian people. Religious people have some airy-fairy notion of God and punishment. And these people deserve to be punished, and that's because they're defective, they need to be punished, and therefore you shouldn't help them. Well, Christian people don't feel that way. So there's an attitude about people and how you treat one another. And that transcends all the way through life, even in corporations. And so in this country, this capitalist system is failing. And the reason it's failing is because of the way people feel about each other. Do they care about each other? Do they care? Do they mind if jobs are sent overseas and people are thrown on those scrappy? People over 50, you know, if they fall out of corporations, they'll never work again in a good job. Now, do we worry about that? Apparently not. So Robert Trump got in because he seized on that problem. Okay? So you know, proper socialism does work. I lived through it. And after Thatcher, who was desperately right-wing and was totally economic ignoramus, I mean, she did just about destroyed the country. She closed down all the publicly owned industries, figuring that, well, private enterprise will rise up again, and it didn't happen. And after this financial crash, you know, in England and around the world, again, anyway, so yes, socialism, as I lived through it, does work. It worked. And of course, so what has happened with the right wing and after Thatcher for the last 30 odd years is that they rolled it back as the welfare state is stripped there. So education now costs, you can't go to college, you have to pay for it. Social housing has been sold off, okay? So there's no social housing much anymore. And the last bastion is the National Health Service. And they dearly love it to privatize it. Just as they privatized the Royal Mail. Now America, you could say, Dallas is more socialistic in a way than London. Because we have a subsidized DOT, right? We have a subsidy, and the city owns the water supply. Well, in England, that will all be sold off and privatized. And of course, a few people would grow filthy rich over that. And of course, you know, that's the way it works. So yes, there is a big difference. Now, in terms of guns, I grew up and there were no guns. I mean, in fact, you know, there was two policemen were killed in London in the early 60s, and the criminals didn't carry guns because there was the death penalty. And so 2 policemen were killed, and there was a public manhunt for these people. When they were turned over, the criminals turned them over to the police after about a couple of weeks. Because that was the attitude. They had hoarded guns because they realized, you know, use guns and, you know, you'll be hung over it. And of course we did away with the death penalty, and because we've had mass immigration from here, there, and everywhere. I mean, 1 in 8 people are now from foreign lands. So they brought all their violence and their ways with them. Like the drug people from Eastern Europe and from the Caribbean. So, you know, yeah, if you have guns, I mean, the surprising thing about America is there's so many people left alive with all these guns. That's what surprises me. So guns, I don't think make it. The other strange thing, I mean, in France, for example, the government fears the people, okay? Because if they do something that people don't like, there's riots in the street, okay? And of course, when you say, well, we fear the government, what that says is, we don't have democracy. That's what it says. Now, you know, because if you believe in democracy, and you're going to fight for democracy, basically, the people should get what they want, okay? Now, of course, in this country, as Tom often says, we have the best democracy money can buy because the people with the money have bought the democracy. And the average person feels that going to vote doesn't make any difference. And he's quite right. Because I mean, these wars that go on and on and on are really corporate wars to promote corporate ideals in America. And so, the idea of patriotism, going to fight for America. No, you're not going to fight for America. You're going to fight for corporate interests. That's really what goes on. And this gun notion and gun violence really, it's a form of madness, I think. But anyway, that's what I got to say.
Well, I still maintain the position that socialism is a recipe for poverty. Whenever you start talking about wealth inequity rather than wealth generation, I think you're in trouble. And many examples of that throughout the world. China is moving more into capitalism, and I think that's a good sign for China's prosperity going forward. With the issues that were brought up, I understand and I value the middle way. However, I think there are some issues that are probably best left polarized, because these are complex issues. And quoting a few statistics here and there, when even the statistics are disputed by people with different viewpoints, that's I don't know that that's really getting you where you want to go. I think we've had an agenda here in this country to take the guns away, and it's a power grab. If you doubt that they want to take the guns, just look at the UN. The UN has passed resolutions for universal disarmament. And the wording is that they don't want citizens to be challenging the legitimate power of the state, is the way they word it. Well, that's not the way we think here in this country. If in fact the power derives from the people need to retain some part of that power. Guns are messy things. I don't like them either, but I do see their utility in preserving some kind of part of individual power. I'll stay away from the God thing. And I think I'll stay away from the other thing, the sex thing as well. But we have people who are really polarized on these issues. And again, I go into the deal is it's kind of like you create all these gun-free zones, and then you're blaming lawful gun owners, people who aren't criminals. You're blaming and trying to penalize them, it seems, when somebody goes wild in one of these zones, and that's not right. That's really not right. If you look at what happened in Parkland, talking about how complex issues are, they had many warnings that this individual was going off his nut, and he even talked about doing something like what he did. So it's kind of okay. They had all the warnings. They didn't take appropriate action, and now the entire country's in an uproar to for safety. And then I think the next weekend, Chicago had 30 gun deaths over the weekend. And that's just like in, 3-day weekend there in Chicago, 30 gun deaths. I mean, if in comparison, you look where the regulation is toughest. Chicago, New York, Baltimore,
DC,
Detroit. I don't know about LA. I'm not really sure what the statistics are.
California has some of the strictest gun laws in the nation, based upon Malcolm X and his movement with the Black Panthers in the 60s, because the police were killing so many black people, unarmed black people in LA. He came up with the idea that they would form neighborhood patrols, armed, open carry of rifles, which is legal, you know, the Constitution gives you that right. Well, the gun laws were originally started in California to suppress minorities.
And that's been a factor, and I mean, it's controversial, but the history of the National Rifle Association is they actually were founded on the principle of helping the blacks have the gun rights, basically, because there were a lot of southern states especially that did not wish for the black people to be armed. And so I mean, it's really a matter of a very complex issue, and I'll let someone else have the mic.
Well, I thought you gave a great presentation, and I agree with most of it, not quite all of it. As far as privatization of the various functions like the water company and the sewage and all of that, the United Nations started the idea of public-private partnerships. And that does take these things that are community businesses, basically, that are nonprofit, and put them in the hands of private people for money. And that's part of the globalist agenda, where the wealthy people take over the world and the rest of us are serfs. Talking about the World Health Organization, I would question all your sources, because a friend of mine was in the CIA for 27 years, and mostly in Saudi Arabia and Iran. He was an electronics expert. He was very knowledgeable. And we spent a lot of time together, he and another friend of his and I, when he was in Dallas. He told me in 1974 that World War III was going to be in the 80s. It was not going to be nuclear, it was going to be biological, and it would be made to appear to be the natural outbreak of a disease. And that the purpose of it was to eliminate black Africa and the subcontinent of India. He was talking about AIDS. And during the time that AIDS broke out in the region of Africa, it was exactly at the same time that our World Health Organization was inoculating extensively in that same area for various other diseases. I don't trust the WHO 1 inch. I don't trust the United Nations 1 inch. My personal opinion is we should get out of the UN and get it out of the United States, because it's a globalist organization, which means dictatorship. I'm glad Trump went against the Trans-Pacific Partnership idea, because that would put all control in a little corporate group, and no company would be able to go to court. The EU is not representative of the people. They don't elect those people at all. These globalist ideas, folks, are taking us all into slavery. And look at what they put out there and tell us they plan to do. Go to Wikipedia and look up the Georgia Guidestones, and the first tenet that they have put up there is maintain the earth at this is one of their great words, sustainable population of under 500 million. Now that means that they intend to murder about 7 billion people on this planet. These globalists are evil, and they're trying to shock us into following what they say do. I would like to see every single one of these little shooters here and there given very psychiatric treatment to analyze, are these programmed people? And I think they are. I think most of them are, because it's these shock effects that say, oh God, we got to let the government take over and stop all this stuff. And as far as Kennesaw, Georgia, and Source and so forth, I called the city manager's office and talked to his secretary for 20 minutes on that. And those figures, 89%, were correct. And people from all over the world have called that government, that city government, to get advice on how to write their statutes and so forth. I think that I hate violence. I believe in thou shalt not kill. But we live in a world that is a long way from idealism, from what we would like. And I don't see humanity as being a very evolved species on this planet. We're the most out of step with nature. I have found that when I grew up, I was in the country and I could go out into nature. That gets you closer with the creator of everything on this planet. And we don't have enough of that. We have too much concrete and steel in this world. Again, I think that a lot of these shootings are false flag things. You know, the burning of the Reichstag building in Germany in the 30s was a shock effect to the Germans. Our government building was burned down. Well, the Nazis kept lots of records, and it turned out when they found records after World War II, the Nazis burned that down and blamed it on a communist. And it shocked the public so that they started passing statutes that were incidentally, if you will look it up and go to some translations, are almost verbatim, like our Patriot Act and the, what is the other act? The what?
FISA, F-I-S-A.
Well,
that's like the
not that. A lot of the laws are very, very similar. No, that covers enough. Besides.
The FISA is the warrant research.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody have any reading glasses?
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Are those too strong?
Oh, no, anything that'll make these little
I have
specks
some weaker ones if you need them.
look bigger. Thank you for a lovely talk. Thank you so much. I'll work from the bottom up on our bill here. Says that our guest argues that sometimes compassion is more important than truth when discussing controversial topics. And she took kind of a, and I agree, forgive me if the term's wrong, but she took kind of an existentialist approach even to the word truth. What is the truth? A lot of people think it's your side, it's my side, and then there's the truth. And I think she kind of led us into that when she showed us this singing bowl. What is this? Is this an herb grinder? Is this a singing bowl? What are your perceptions of things that would make you identify this object in a certain way? Just as she had a tray that could be used as a table. I experienced someone online, his name was Prince E.A., and he was talking about joy and happiness and how people could not be happy until they got that phone. They're not going to be happy until they attain, until they accomplish, achieve. And when it's not really necessarily the event or the object that they're wanting, it's a feeling. Now, we can go all into, well, they've been sold and we've got all of this commercialism, and that isn't the point. The point is talking about seeking your objective truth and questioning your personal biases and how closely are you tied to your personal biases if you're not willing to let them go just a little bit to experience some personal growth. I grew up around some biases I didn't think were okay. I had the old elderly crispy people in my family that grew up in the South, and as 4-year-olds listening to these people, we thought that they were just really ignorant and wrong. And fortunately for our own happiness, we were able to question those biases and take a step. As far as the God issues go, I think it's very interesting the way that you approach. I have been an atheist, and we've got some really interesting ones out there. Ronald Reagan's son, has anybody seen Freedom from Religion online yet? He's actually quite amusing. To being an agnostic, to being a devout agnostic. Wayne Dyer spoke of Max Planck. When Max Planck accepted the Nobel Prize, he said there has to be a creative intelligence behind this. And that was his acceptance speech. A book I would recommend on that is the Thomas Troward Edinburgh Dory Lecture Series. That's really good stuff. Personal growth achieved by examining our own biases and prejudices. I can remember a time not too long ago where I would think, well, I'm right and you're wrong. And if you don't agree with my views, well, you are ignorant and dysfunctional in some way. And as I was exposed to more cultures, and some in religious sectors, that were so strong in their dogmatic thinking that they were not willing to compromise even for their health and happiness, it made me start to question, well, how attached am I to these views? Not very. I like to listen a lot more than I talk. And there's a good reason for that. You learn a lot more when your mouth is closed and your ears are open. And back to the last line of the bill here, she argues that compassion is more important when discussing these hot-button issues. And I would like to add that at times when we are feeling our most helpless, it is very important not to lose compassion. Thank you.
And thank you.
It's you, Tom.
Well, that's what's in.
I'll just say one thing, but I don't need a microphone. We can learn more about this topic and then some by watching a great show called The 100. Anybody watch that here? What is it? The 100.
Come on,
Series. Huh?
Come on up here and say it.
Oh my goodness. First of all, I'm an atheist, but I'm spiritual. Now, does that offend anyone? I can't deny the existence of a higher being. I can't prove he doesn't exist, or it doesn't exist. So I say I'm spiritual, but I've learned a lot this past year watching a show called The 100. It's a series, and it starts back up on Tuesday night on CW channel. I believe that's a free channel, but right now the first 4 seasons are on Netflix. But it's a good show to see how society evolves after a nuclear war. Okay, it's a futuristic thing, and I know some people don't get into that, but it really raises some good questions about how would science, people that believe in only science, how would they rule versus people who rejected science after the nuclear apocalypse as being sacrilegious, because science, after all, brings about the end of the world. So you have this tribal faction versus these scientific, more or less atheists, and it's fascinating. It's fascinating. I recommend it. That's it.
One more comment. Again, I thought this was a very good presentation. I'm really glad I was here. And I would like to commend your wisdom for leaving out the 4th G, because this is an area that divides the population. Half of the population will never be able to understand.
What's that?
Gals.
Can I say a few words? Please. I just kind of something
thing come up to my mind when I heard of today talking about the subject of socialist capitalism. And I really don't have any statistic. I just came here to support my friend and listen to intelligent people talk and different views. So this is my second time here. But anyway, so I came to this country 20 years ago. I graduated here and I got my degree. So I found a job, and not now, but back then. And I got graduate education. I love it, and I became a U.S. citizen. I love this society. I do a lot of volunteer work. So when my parents came to visit me, of course they kind of older. My dad is a hardline communist. I grew up in army barrack, which we call Red Army barrack. So, but anyway, I grew up in there. So I was so young and foolish, I guess, in a way. I mean, I argued with my parents, say, which system is better? I said, look at me, I'm a living example. I will live in this country, great country. I got my education. In China, you can pretty much one turn national examination. You failed, most likely you're never going to become a better, higher class, better job. But anyway, so I got that. So I feel great. I feel I'm in part of this society. Then I can find a great job, and I have a house. You know, back then I guess it's probably impossible. Everybody can live in the housing project in the communist or socialist environment. So I argued with my parents. In a way, I was foolishly think I was just so great, proving to my parents this is better system. So, but I think probably over the years I heard my parents a little bit. Then the second time, a few years later, I went back to visit them. We reopened this subject. So my dad was orphan, so he, 13, 14 years old, he went to the army. It wasn't because he believed in communists or Kuomintang. He just wanted to find a place to hut and grub. What do you call that? He just found a place to survive. But of course, he was smart, intelligence. He got his education in the socialist army, so he got promoted and they become army. Young officers, and went home, find a beautiful wife, and have children, family. For him, that's all he knows. He's grateful for what he got. So I feel really bad that arguing with him, which system better, because we live in a different environment. I came to this country through my education, earned my own living, and I love this country, I love this system. But that wasn't my parents' case. So when we talk about it, what's the difference or which one's better, there's really no simple answer for that. Really different. Our time has changed. Even nowadays, communist society or socialist society like China, they're totally different than 20 years or 40 years ago. So all I just have apologized to my parents says, really, we live in different timing and we have different life experiences, but we are family. We just know it doesn't really matter which system's better. As people with family, as friends, we love each other. We strive for the best.
I guess I'm the last one standing. Anyone else want to get up here? Do you want to say something up here? Anybody else? No, that's it? I'm the last one standing then. I want to thank our speaker for doing a great job here tonight. It's a great life if you don't weaken, they say. And I appreciate John's remarks about England and about different things that have happened. We have a society that, you mentioned gays, God's gun, and gays. So guns was I'll touch on that briefly. In my view, for what it's worth, a lot of children are being killed in our society that shouldn't happen. A lot of guns are loose that shouldn't happen. I am not for eliminating guns by any means, but I am for more restrictions on guns so the young people don't get them, so the wrong people don't get them. And there's no restriction on a gun owner for requiring a gun owner to secure that weapon. If that weapon was secured, other people wouldn't get it, and children wouldn't be killed. And that would what you brought up is good, and I'm for that. And I'm not for eliminating the Second Amendment or anything of the sort, for maintaining the Second Amendment. But I just thought I'd mention that. get that out of the way. As far as our economy, we're in bad shape. We've got $20 trillion in debt in this country. We've got corporations ruling the roost. We've got corporations running the world, so to speak. Apple produces everything in China. They don't produce anything here. So they go for cheaper labor. And the end result is we're buying their equipment and we don't have the jobs. So people are hurting. And we have close to 25 million people out of work, either unemployed or underemployed in this country. That has to be corrected. In my view, since the Industrial Revolution, machines have been replacing people. Machines don't pay taxes, people do. And we've reached a point where we have all these people out of work and we're hurting. We put in an 8-hour day in this country in 1938, down from 10, and they reduced the work week from 60 hours to 40 hours, the work day from 10 hours to 8 hours. They did not cut the pay. They got the same take-home pay in 8 hours they made in 10 hours. It worked, and the rest of the world followed. So they provided work for a lot of people, and it provided a better economy. My mother used to say that during the Depression you could buy a lot for $1, but nobody had $1. That was the problem, and so everybody was out of work. So we need to create jobs. We need to make a better society. So how are we going to do that? John mentioned that the Labour Party in England did better. People, we should borrow from that. We should maybe shorten our workday in this country and provide more jobs. And we need to put tariffs on corporations overseas. They're the ones that left here to go where labor costs are cheaper. That's the problem. But anyway, I better shut up while I'm ahead. I'll give it back to our speaker. Thank you.
Well, first I want to thank you for allowing me to talk about these controversial issues, and that just shows democracy works. We can express our views openly and respectfully, even we may not totally agree with one another. In fact, on another occasion, I might have expressed more stronger personal views, but I wanted to be one is to show the level of maturity, to be more open and to see different views, and also focusing more on finding common ground and solutions rather than stating what I believe. I occasionally would say what I believe. I think a more fruitful dialogue is to try to see different perspectives, and that's what I try to strive for, and that's how my topic comes into being, is to see our blind spot. It's easier for us to find views that will support, reinforce our views. You don't grow if you only find views to reinforce what you already believe. You only grow by seeing beyond your personal views and try to see other points of views. So that's what I try to strive for, but I don't always able to do that, and that's why I come here to share. Maybe it's a lesson for all of us, try to see different points of views and see the views that's different from our own, so we can all start a fruitful dialogue. And thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Well, that's it for tonight. Our speaker is still here. They kick us out of here at 10:30, just so you know. And you're welcome to talk to our speaker. But the formal meeting is over. Until next week. Thank you.
Give a speech.